Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Top Hat Gaming Man here, and today I have decided to talk about something rather, how would you say, negative. Yes, because people seem to love my negative content. Today we are going to be talking about what has ruined retro game collecting over the years. Personally, I started game collecting. I rather refer to it as game procuring because I actually just buy lots of games for fun rather than simply collecting them for the sake of collecting. But anyway, I started collecting back in 2002 in the days where all retro games were cheap. So I would go around the boot sales, I'd buy bloody loads of games for £1 each. I'd come back with whole sacks of games. It didn't matter if the games were good, didn't matter if they were bad, because they were so cheap. It didn't matter if I made a mistake. So if I had a crap game and it was only £1, who cares? This is the big difference between then and now. Because these days, the internet is full of absolute morons. Like, you've got all these horrible games out there, like European Super Nintendo games, such as Beethoven, X-Zone, and Christmas Days. You've got stupid collectors out there who are willing to pay like close to £1,000 for each of those games, simply to complete their sets, which I think is a bit pathetic. But I am digressing slightly. Let's talk about how it's all come to this. Why there's so many idiots out there willing to pay such large amounts of money. Part of it's due to competition, because there's just so many people all trying to collect exactly the same thing, even if it happens to be complete crap. So, what's brought all these people forward to ruin retro game collecting? Why is the scene full of twats? Basically, there's a few elements. The first one we will talk about is YouTube. Yes, those dirty, bloody YouTubers. People just like me, I suppose. But yes, over the years, the YouTube community have created loads of great content about various systems. Let's talk about in the early days, where you had people like the Angry Video Game Nerd, Pat the NES Punk, people like that who would they really bigged up the Nintendo Entertainment System. You have to remember, the Nintendo Entertainment System was very popular in the United States. The Famicom was very popular in Japan. But outside of those regions, the system never sold quite as well. Now let's take the United Kingdom, my home for example. In 1989, Nintendo, they were ranked #1 with their NES in the United States. In the United Kingdom, they were bloody ranked #7. So you had Nintendo as the 7th most popular brand, behind the Sega Master System, behind the Amstrad CPC 464, behind the Commodore 64, behind the ZX Spectrum. Did I say it already? I don't think I did. Behind the ZX Spectrum, behind the Master System, there were 6 gaming platforms that was doing better than Nintendo. But because these YouTubers have come along, they've exposed franchises such as Castlevania, for example, or Mega Man, which no one gave a crap about in Europe during the 80s. They've exposed that to a wider audience now. But because that wider audience are all desperate to own those old school Nintendo games, you have to remember those games never sold well to begin with in that region. So there's more people out there who want those games than there was actual copies published in the first bloody place, because no one used to give a crap about Nintendo back then. People only cared about it if they was American or Japanese. The rest of the world, Nintendo, it was just another gaming brand amongst the hodgepodge of others, as I said, amongst Sega, Atari, Amstrad, Sinclair, like I said, lots of them, Commodore. There was so much going on back then. So yes, YouTubers have pumped up the price of games, mainly, as I said, because they have promoted games in regions where the supply is scarce, because no one was originally interested. But apart from that as well, they have popularised it, and people's nostalgia, people are just more into gaming than they used to be retrospectively, I suppose. Further from that as well, let's talk about Donald Trump's favourite word. Fake news. Yes, fake news affects the prices of games as well, and have contributed to it being ruined. Like, you get all those bloody tabloid newspapers releasing absolutely outrageous articles about like Nintendo games being found in lofts and all of them being worth like £1,000 each. So then you've got everyone's grandmothers coming out of the woodwork all saying, oh, I found these rare Nintendo games, can I buy it, can I sell them to you please? They say, oh yes please, okay, they'll be £1,000 each. So yes, you have nonsense going on like that. Everyone thinks everything retro is worth an absolute fortune, which we know is far from the case. But that, in a way, is artificially inflating the price of things. Let's take Conker's Bad Fur Day, for example, on the Nintendo 64. For some reason, most idiots out there seem to have this thing in their head that the game is, oh, it's really rare. I'm going to pay a fortune for it because it's rare. Well, it's published by Rare, but that's about as far as the Rare goes with that one. It's ridiculously common. Go on eBay and you'll see listings and listings of Conker's Bad Fur Day all the time. That's simply because it's worth a lot of money because it's sought after. But in terms of rarity, there's bloody loads of copies. Like, this is quite amusing, isn't it? Like, they published it on the Xbox, didn't they, a few years later? The Xbox version was actually made in much more limited supply than the Nintendo 64 version. Yet for some reason you have to pay £150 for the Nintendo 64 version, but the bloody Xbox version you can buy for £20 from CEX. Like, what the hell is that all about? It's literally misconceptions that continue to artificially inflate the market, and that's a perfect example. For literally no reason, the version of the Nintendo 64 is more sought after, despite the fact there's bloody a ridiculous amount of copies around. Like, I, for example, managed to source a copy only 2 years ago for £50, because if you look hard enough, you will find cheapish copies of Conker, because there's so bloody many of them. You will find a deal. And the same goes for Earthbound as well. You can get that for well under market value. I remember I travelled all over the United States, went 25 different states, visited about 50 retro game stores, and every single bloody one of them pretty much had Earthbounds. A lot of them were even complete in box, like my copy. Like, Earthbound is everywhere you look in America, yet there's this lie perpetuated that the game is rare. No, it's not. It's sought after. And the only reason it's sought after, because a ridiculous amount of people have managed to convince themselves it's rare, even though it's not. So yes, that's the first two things, YouTubers and fake news. The third and biggest contributor to making retro game collecting rubbish is the advent of smartphones. Probably the most obvious one on this list, but definitely the biggest contributing factor. I could simply go to the boot sale before and get a vast array of games. I'd come back with a whole sack of them. That doesn't happen anymore, because back then you had to have an interest in games to even want to be able to buy them. If you wanted to sell them on, to actually know what you was looking at, you needed to have a base knowledge. So you had to actually like games to essentially have any knowledge on them. That all changed with smartphones, because people could just get up the bloody eBay app and check out the price of everything. So then it just dumbed everything down. So then you have Jimmy Savile reseller here, Jimmy Savile reseller there. Everyone comes along, and now suddenly everyone's an expert, because they can look up on their phone and say, oh, this game's worth a lot of money, I better buy it so I can sell it on and buy myself some scratch cards, cigarettes, and maybe some dog food for my disgusting Staffordshire Bull Terrier. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's the sort of scum who's ruined gaming. So you've got YouTubers, they're forcing up all the prices. Like, let's give another example, Metal Jesus Rocks. He's regularly releasing videos that are made which will do nothing but force up the price. Like, he makes lists about top 5 rare DS games no one's heard of. Obviously 200,000 people then watch the video. Then they're top 5 rare DS games everybody's heard of, and then they're worth a fortune all of a sudden. Games that no one cared about before, but then suddenly, because they're rare, everyone wants them. Nothing against him personally, but just an example of how these YouTubers are continuing to push up the price of games. Moving on from that, as I said, the fake news, there's always crap going on like that. People convincing themselves something's rare when it's not. Like, one more example was it, anniversary PlayStation 4. Like, how many morons would pay £1,000 plus for that, despite the fact that they made like 20,000 of them? How could something be rare? There's bloody 20,000. Like, what stupid cretins! Like, at least with my Street Fighter Hyper Fight, and I bought the other day, only 90 copies are made. Like, 90 copies, that's what's rare, not 20,000, you idiots. And yes, finally, as I said, the smartphone. The smartphone ruins everything. Which, to be fair, is probably why you're watching me talking to you right now. because you're just a zombie glued to your bloody smartphone and I'm talking to you through your smartphone. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to my ramblings about why retro games collecting isn't what it used to be. So, what other reasons can you think of why collecting retro games isn't as cheap and fun as it was back in the day? Like, it used to be like bloody collecting Pogs, for example. You could just buy so many of them and you wouldn't really have any negative implications on your life. Cheerio!
Born in London in 86, a stachio gent named Richard Parliament. He loves to wrestle, but he loves one more thing: handhelds round the world. He fights in his comments and he argues with fans. It's a problem no one understands. If there's two things he loves, it's gaming and handhelds round the world. Drinking fine wine, fighting fanboys, handhelds round the world.
Top Hat Gaming Man.